Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I am the host, Andy Steele, and this is a gentleman I'm going to be introducing here tonight that we have not talked to for a very long time. You remember back when this show was in its audio days, when I sounded like I was recording on a Fisher-Price cassette recorder or something? But this guy was here with us at that time, and I think he was on this program on a couple of different occasions, but been involved in some very important work, not just at AE 9/11 Truth, but also in the anti-war movement. You're going to be learning more about him this evening. His name is Phil Restino. He is a peacetime veteran, having served 2 years in the Army as an infantryman. Not long after the U.S. and the U.K. bombed and invaded Iraq in 2003, Phil became active in the local anti-war movement in his home area of Daytona Beach, Florida. Phil founded the Central Florida chapter of Veterans for Peace in the summer of 2005 and brought into the chapter fellow Central Florida resident and longtime member of Veterans for Peace, Colonel Bob Bowman. We'll be talking a little bit about him tonight. Phil co-hosted a show with Larry Pinckney called We Cannot Be Silent. And let me see if that show is still going on. Let's bring Phil in. Phil, welcome back to 9/11 Freefall.
Thanks, Andy. It's great to be back.
So you're not co-hosting that show anymore?
No, Larry and I had a 3-year run. It was a monthly program, and we got to interview some great guests, and we were able to have call-ins as well. Larry Pinckney, for those who don't know, he was one of the member of the original Black Panther Party back in the 1960s out in Oakland, and he, like many of the members of the Black Panther Party, were on the recipient end of COINTELPRO, and he ended up, thankfully, not getting killed, but he did get set up and did about 10 years in prison because of that. The FBI has a way of neutralizing any kind of movement that may arise, and Larry was not exempt, and he's got a lot of experience as an activist all these years, and we just had a good time working together for 3 years, from January 2012 through December 2014, and our first broadcast actually was on Martin Luther King's birthday, January 15th of 2012. And we got the name for our program from Martin Luther King's 1967 Beyond Vietnam speech. So the intro to our program is pretty cool. But yes, so that's the story on and Larry Pinckney's still involved. He's out there. He's often a guest. He's a regular guest on the Alex Jones program, and he's still active online and in the communities. Great guy.
Tell him we'd love to have him on here. I would love to hear about his experiences with COINTELPRO. I would love to compare notes because that definitely goes on in the 9/11 Truth movement. And by the way, folks, if you notice the light went off, I don't think that was the FBI, but something screwy's going on with this light. It could happen again. Just a word of warning out to the audience. All right, so it's been a long time since we talked on this program. Let's start from the beginning for this audience. Tell us more about your military service, and was it in fact the invasion of Iraq that turned you anti-war, or were you leaning in that direction beforehand?
Well, the first part of your question, the military service was nothing to shout about. I did 2 years in the infantry, mechanized infantry at Fort Hood. I wasn't a model soldier or anything. I was never in harm's way. Basically, I just wore green clothes, went to work each day, and at the end of the day, went to the liquor store and bought some beer and did the same thing the next day. Got out after my 2-year enlistment, got the college money, and made my way to Boston, and was able to get a degree with that college money. In 2000, I got out. I was in the Army from 83 to 85, and except for special operations and all the, we weren't really at war at that time. Um, but as far as the anti-war movement, um, it was the shock and awe. It was the weapons of mass destruction. I couldn't believe how it was being built up, and the shock and awe attack on Iraq, March 19, 2003, and the whole thing about weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and it didn't seem to bother anybody, or it didn't seem to bother people badly enough to say no to this war. And what the 9/11 wars are still going. They've opened the gates, and we've had basically since 9/11, 23 plus years of ongoing war overseas.
Pretty much, and it just keeps expanding. And I remember, we were told it was Osama bin Laden. He's out in the caves in Afghanistan or Pakistan. I was never really clear which country we needed to invade first,
Right.
But they were telling us what we got to do. And, I remember the one kid at my university, because I was in college at the time, the one kid that was protesting the Afghan war. And it's just a sad, sorry image burned in my mind of this one kid sitting there. And I had friends that would make fun of him. Because, how could you be anti-war? 9/11 just happened. I didn't make fun of him, but I thought, wow, you really want peace at any cost. Now, I had no idea about the 9/11 evidence or anything at that point, but it was one kid. But that one kid grew into many kids and many people, many adults too, over time, because the focus shifted after a while. It became George Bush Jr. said that he didn't even think about Osama bin Laden anymore after he got his mindset on getting Saddam Hussein and getting the U.S. fingers into Iraq. And the focus just changed. And then later we got Obama, hope and change, but more of the same, And we had the conflicts in Libya, Syria, and it just never seems to end. Now, I mentioned the 9/11 evidence. Obviously, had I been awake to that from day one, my perspective on everything would have been much different. But along with being anti-war, you're also an 9/11 truth advocate. Talk about your experience on the day of September 11th, and how did you start to wake up to the fact that we were all lied to about what really happened?
Well, on the morning of 9/11, it was on television, every station, the live broadcast, and for the longest time, the two towers were smoking, and then all of a sudden, the one tower came straight down and was blowing up in dust, and it just didn't make sense. What my eyes saw and hit my brain, it just was surreal. It didn't make sense. And then not long after, the same thing with the other twin tower. But the power of the media, Andy, was any questioning. They were immediately on with these experts, many of them tied to the neocon movement, which had been calling for these never-ending wars in the Middle East and Central Asia. The PNAC folks, who, by the way, about a couple dozen of them made it into the Bush administration in departments of state and defense. Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney, two of them. But the media and these experts, the way that they can push the narrative on folks, it just erased any questioning, and I believed it. I even at the age of 41 years old, I even went to the recruiter's office to see if I could join up and not be a combatant, but perhaps a medic or something. And I was too old, and but that's how it got me. And it wasn't, but the weapons of mass destruction, Andy, to answer your question about becoming anti-war, was the build up to the invasion of Iraq and the the spectacle of the shock and awe bombing of it, and then there were no weapons of mass destruction. And to me, that was, these kids are coming home in body bags every day. What's going on? This is wrong. And about 2005, I had seen. Well, first of all, in 2005 was that correspondence dinner that they do in Washington every spring, where the president is kind of either roasts or is roasted in a way, and it the audience is made up of senators, congressmen, political figures, heavies, and the heavies in the media, and it's black tie, and usually the president does a little funny kind of thing on the stage. And this time around, mind you, we're 2 years into combat in Iraq, and in 2005 it was pretty heavy. A lot of people getting killed, a lot of troops coming home in boxes, and and George Bush's funny skit was a slideshow of him looking underneath the desk. No weapons of mass destruction here. A snapshot of him looking behind the curtain. No weapons, and everyone in the audience was laughing. Republican, Democrat, congressman, media, the media who'd been pushing the WMD lies, Saddam Hussein, mushroom cloud in 45 minutes, and they were all laughing, and that it couldn't have been more obscene. And so that's when, after that, there was this thing called the Downing Street hearings, the basement hearings. And I wasn't familiar with Veterans for Peace at the time, and it really didn't click with me then, but they were involved, in the Code Pink as well. And folks like Ray McGovern, former CIA, former intelligence people that were against the war too, and spoke out about the lies, the intelligence lies. They were having hearings in the basement because it was Democrats were, I believe, they were in the minority, so they were relegated to a room in the basement of the house, whatever, with the office building, and the Downing Street memo was something that was leaked by the Brits, the Tony Blair administration, where they had in black and white that the U.S. leadership and the British leadership had conspired to lie to the people with this WMD threat, to really pump it, and they made it up. And so that was waking me up. And then further into the year, in the summer, Gold Star mother Cindy Sheehan, who had become a prominent voice, as a mother who lost a son in this Iraq war, George Bush, during the summer recess, some troops from Ohio or somewhere, about a dozen of them, were killed in a plane crash or what have you, that day. And when George Bush was asked about it, he said that they died for a noble cause. And that just set off Cindy Sheehan, who lost a son, and she made her way down to George Bush's ranch in Texas. Again, it was the recess, and camped outside his ranch, saying, "I'm not leaving until George Bush tells me what this noble cause is." And what this is key as far as Veterans for Peace, on the media, the national media at that time was covering these things. And I saw these men accompanying Cindy Sheehan, and they had these T-shirts on that were, they had the white helmet with the dove on it, and it said Veterans for Peace. Evidently, Cindy Sheehan was just at their national convention, and they went down there to Texas with her. And I looked up Veterans for Peace. I called them up and I said, I'd like to get involved. I was in the Army, but I'm not a war veteran. Am I still able to join? They said, yes, anyone who's been in service can join. And that's how I got in Veterans for Peace. And I founded the Central Florida chapter. And as you mentioned, Colonel Bob Bowman, who was the director of the Star Wars Strategic Defense Initiative, a whistleblower in the 80s for that, was a member of our chapter, our new chapter. And um, I was very conscious of me not being a war veteran and not having anything to brag about as far as my service. And what I wanted to do, well, actually, what I wanted to do with this chapter was form it and then bring all this information to the veterans posts in the area, many of them now made up of Vietnam veterans. And I was naive at the time. I thought that if I presented this information to these Vietnam veterans, they would not allow what happened to them as far as being lied into Vietnam and then being there for 10 years happen to this generation of troops. But I didn't understand the brotherhood and the brothers in arms, and that they would not speak out as long as they had brothers in arms in harm's way. But I was told to go away. They wanted no part of it. So basically, I was left with the chapter, and we did get some Vietnam veterans here and some Iraq War veterans. Bob Bowman was a Vietnam veteran. So we did, but we also had peacetime veterans. We took anyone we could get, and we turned into a pretty strong chapter. So that's how I got to Veterans for Peace in the Central Florida chapter.
It's like going down memory lane, because I had a very similar path to coming to this information. I never did serve in the Army, although I did go to the recruiting office for the Navy. And it was not even to go avenge 9/11 or anything. I was just a very young man. I didn't know what to do after college. I thought that'd be a good adventure, go out in the high seas and all this. But what I didn't like is, I knew the situation with Iraq. And when they talked to me and they addressed any concerns I have, the tone of voice, the inflection, the kind of things they said, they reminded me of closers. And closers are these things. When I worked at this other telemarketing office before, it was a really shady operation. And, I only worked there for like a week or so. But, it was like these things, like what to say to any objection that the person might have to giving their credit card number over the phone. You call them and act like they want a vacation, but they really have to like pay for it. I mean, this was a bad operation, and they never paid me, by the way. So I got my comeuppance for even, walking through the door. But everything that the Navy said sounded like sales techniques to me. And I just thought, this isn't like what they're portraying on TV. It just has a very sleazy feel to it. And I just don't want anything part of that. So I did Peace Corps instead. But I was very close. And, you see Colin Powell on the day, it was actually my birthday, talking to the UN. He's got all these nice medals on him, and he's talking, and there goes my lady again. But he's talking to the UN, and he says that the Saddam Hussein's got these mobile weapons lab. What's the average person know what a mobile weapons lab looks like? It's a blurry gray picture. So you believe him, but then all of this stuff starts coming out, and it's like, wow, we were lied to. These people died. And on top of this, look at all this information about 9/11 that we are not aware of.
Yes.
So, it completely changed my outlook on the world. It changed so many other people's outlook. And now I'm sitting here, and I'm not saying that there isn't brotherhood, that there isn't honor among soldiers. But honestly, I look at most governments now like they're organized crime syndicates fighting each other. And they're legal organized crime syndicates. You pay your protection money, taxes to them every year. And anybody that's challenging their racket gets shoved out, just like you're watching a crime movie. Or taken down. So that's what you're signing up to do when you go into the military, in my opinion. You mentioned Bob Bowman was in your group. Yeah, you mentioned Bob Bowman was. Now, I got a clip. If people don't know who this was, I'm going to play this for about 2 minutes. But he was very involved in your chapter of Veterans for Peace. He passed away, what was it, 2012, I believe?
2013.
2013, okay. But he was in Experts Speak Out. I can't play the entire segment because it won't let me play like the 5-minute segment, but I can play 2 minutes of it. So here it is.
I'm Dr. Bob Bowman, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force, retired. flew 101 combat missions in Vietnam, and directed all the DoD Star Wars programs under Presidents Ford and Carter. My PhD is in aeronautics and nuclear engineering from Caltech, and I did my postdoctoral work at the von Karman Institute in Brussels, Belgium, in finite element analysis. I taught at 5 colleges and universities, serving as department head and assistant dean. I first became aware that there was a problem with the government's official conspiracy theory on 9/11 that very morning when I was watching what was happening on television, and my wife says I kept saying over and over, "Where are the interceptors?" And then, of course, when the first of the towers actually started falling down, I just said, "This can't happen. It can't happen." And then the other tower came down, and I said, "This violates the laws of physics. It can't happen." Those aircraft and those fires could not cause those buildings to come down in that way. So I guess I was a very early skeptic. And then, of course, the coup de grace for me was when I found out that Building 7 had collapsed later that day. And when I saw Building 7 come down, to me, Building 7, the fact that its collapse was announced prematurely by the BBC and CNN, and just seeing it come down in what for all the world looks like a perfect controlled demolition of an intact building. I mean, that's what I call a smoking gun. And you put all these things together, and it is absolutely obvious to me that we've been lied to, that the government's official story is physically impossible, and that's why we absolutely need a new investigation of 9/11.
Yeah. Absolutely need a new investigation. Of course, it's an unprecedented event, World Trade Center 7. Never happened before that random office fires can cause a steel frame high-rise to just come down straight and symmetric. But for some reason, the BBC and CNN can predict that it's going to happen, this unprecedented event, even though the lady, Jane Stanley, still has the building standing there beside her. So he makes reference to that. You worked closely with him at Veterans for Peace. Describe what that was like and what Bob Bowman brought to the table.
He was bigger than life. Yes, his pedigree and his background as the director of the Star Wars program is one thing, and a career officer. But just the man he was bigger than life. I don't remember him ever uttering a curse word. A real gentleman, brilliant. You heard of his education. He was a true rocket scientist, and he believed in peace and the missions of Veterans for Peace above any politics or anything else, any funding, or any of that kind of stuff. Bob, when he was asked to be a whistleblower in the 80s during the Reagan administration, because at that time Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, they were in the picture. They were taking this strategic defense initiative and wanting to use it as an offensive threat to other countries, and there was a concern for that. Bob Bowman was asked to come out of private industry. He had only just retired in 1978, and he had 7 kids. I'm sure they all wanted to go to college, and he finally got into private industry, and started to make a few dollars. And Bob answered the call right away, and that's the kind of man he was. Of course, like any whistleblower that we've seen over the years, who's a threat to any government agenda, he was attacked. He was ostracized by all his fellow veterans in the veteran community. he got IRS audits, death threats, but he still kept making the rounds, not only nationally, but internationally as well, giving talks, and his expertise carried a lot of weight. He joined Veterans for Peace in 1985 when they were founded, and he was a keynote speaker for Veterans for Peace at 5 or 6 of their conventions over the years. He was a celebrated member of the anti-war movement, and he gave everything right up to the last day of his life, trying to bring peace and expose 9/11. The 9/11 lie was and still is the justification for the 9/11 wars, and I consider the wars we're in right now, Andy, even though they may not, well, not all of them are the 7 countries in 5 years that the PNAC project for the New American Century guy wanted to take out. I believe 9/11 just opened the gates for the last 23 years of war overseas, and God bless Bob for giving everything up and answering the call once again. Because of his 9/11 truth, you would think the anti-war movement would take somebody like Bob, with his pedigree and his background, not only a fighter pilot, but an interceptor pilot. And where are the interceptors? A nuclear aeronautical engineer, fire fueled by office furnishings and diesel-based jet fuel cannot make 2 110-story steel frame concrete buildings blow up into dust and fall in perfect symmetry in nearly free fall speed. And I don't think you need to be a rocket scientist to get that, So what the anti-war movement, in my opinion, should have done and could have done was take Bob Bowman and put him out front and let Bob take all the arrows, which he would gladly do, and question the justification for these wars that the anti-war movement was supposedly in existence to stop. One other thing that they didn't do that. In fact, they basically threw Bob under the bus. They wanted to disassociate with Bob Bowman calling for 9/11 truth, and then the anti-war movement, maybe even to this very day, would squash any questioning of and there's a number of reasons. There's funding for the groups. There's the fear of becoming a conspiracy theorist and neutralized in that way. And then there's also the good old-fashioned COINTELPRO and the government getting involved in any movement. Like I mentioned Larry Pinckney and the Black Panthers earlier. Our government has a long history of neutralizing any movement that they deem a threat to their agendas. So I suspect that was the case with the anti-war movement as well. To think that the folks that pulled off 9/11 in order to get their 9/11 wars wouldn't anticipate an anti-war movement arising is pretty naive. I would think they'd have things in place, if not people in place, to make sure it's neutralized.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's what was her name? Jane Seberg. There's a film called it's called Seberg. You can watch it on Amazon Prime, I think. And it's all about how COINTELPRO harassed her for speaking out. She was an actress. There's so many COINTELPRO 101. And what it seems that they do is they get their hooks into a movement. They get people who get some street cred. And then they can, once they've got that credit and they've got that voice, and then there always seems to be this very loud minority of people that make you think they're the majority because they're just always there at every spot. Every time somebody new comes in, they're always trying to jump on them and take control of them. And so they can steer the group away from certain topics and make it seem like it's this taboo thing when it might not have been a couple of years ago. And then if you've got people in place in the leadership, they're always trying to prop up that leadership. And if anybody questions that leadership, that person is ostracized as causing problems or disruptions. And they kind of turn it into like a cult-like mentality. Like you can't question the Pharisees of the anti-war group or whatever kind of group that it is, or if it's a 9/11 group, because these are the powers that are in place and kind of keep things in line. And then maybe things can get sabotaged at the last moment too with certain figures, because it's kind of in their hands. So it's a very complex thing, and I think at some point we need to do more shows on that. But it did seem like for a while the anti-war movement and the 9/11 truth movement were aligned. Every time I went to some kind of protest or against the war, there'd be 9/11 truth people there and vice versa.
In the early years, yes.
In the early years, what do you think happened? Like, other than what you've laid out?
To back up a little, and back to the summer of 2005, I went to Washington, D.C. for that big anti-war rally in September. Cindy Sheehan, the Hurricane Katrina, which also was very questionable as far as how that went down and who benefited. That's always a question we should ask: who benefits? Qui bono. Anyway, they went from George Bush's ranch to Hurricane Katrina, and there was a bus caravan to Washington, D.C. with Cindy Sheehan and the anti-war folks, and big anti-war rally in September of 2005. And at that point in time, a local back in Daytona gave me a DVD called In Plain Sight that was done by The Power Hour, radio show. And when I watched it, my head was wanted to explode. It was a 9/11 truth film. It was the first one I had seen. And that's at the time our chapter really got into 9/11 truth, because Bob still hadn't joined yet at this time. And up in Washington, D.C., as you mentioned, at the anti-war rallies in the early years, 9/11 truth was a strong presence. And I believe there was a lot of people at that time questioning it. But what did I think happened is, I think, as you mentioned, the woman you just mentioned, people are made examples of, and the message gets out. And if you got a wife and some kids and a mortgage, people were losing their jobs in the early years. There were people even losing their lives questioning 9/11. So I think the government saw that, hey, we've got to keep this 9/11 people away from the anti-war people, or they're going to be a real threat. So they neutralized it, and they started calling people conspiracy nuts, firing others that said, hey, this is physically impossible. We need to question this. And I think, Andy, for folks listening now in 2024, I think if we go back just a couple of years and look at the whole COVID thing and how any questioning was done, whether about the vaccine or the virus or what have you, any questioning that was done by prominent doctors or scientists, they were having their medical licenses taken away. They were called quacks. They were called deniers. I believe the government and the very big, like big pharma, military industrial complex, the people that work with the government or use the government to achieve their aims, they did a good job as far as neutralizing any questioning of it. And that's a good example for folks who are just tuning in now. The same thing happened to the anti-war 9/11 truth movement. You had to neutralize it in order to keep your agenda going, which is past 23 years of wars.
Yeah, I mean, anytime something challenges the status quo, I mean, the mainstream media, it's not here to help us; it's here to handle us.
Right.
That doesn't mean you jump on every crazy theory out there, but if there's some substance to it, you should certainly bring it up. Yeah, so I also noticed that when Obama came in, and this is just going to kind of shine a light. I think the main issue is that people are really just herd animals. You know, there's people within groups. They say they'll always stand up against injustice. You know, against in any circumstance. But if it's an injustice against, in some instance, that didn't directly affect them, or the person's not as famous as maybe another person, they just kind of sit there silently. Or if the TV is portraying things in a new kind of way, people just sort of get with the program. For instance, most people that I knew were never political. They were happy to say they don't care if you talk about Obama drone striking a wedding in Pakistan, killing children. They'd be like, oh, that's so sad. And then go on and giggling at their cell phone. But then when Donald Trump comes into the presidency, you know, suddenly the TV's telling you that it's cool to be politically active. You got to save your democracy because this guy's a fascist for some reason. And now everybody acts like there's some kind of, you know, diehard political activist for like the last 30 years. And they're just repeating what they hear on the news. So if the TV says, oh, you know, there's this big crisis with kids being put in cages on the Mexican border, and never mind that this was happening under Obama and we didn't talk about it. It's like a big crisis now. Now everybody, all the barking kennel dogs are like, kids in cages on Mexican border, kids in cages on Mexican border. And then the next week it's something else, and they forgot that they were advocating for that a week before. So monkey see, monkey do. I really think the United States is a big high school, and people just get into groups because it's the cool thing to do. And so when the anti-war movement was getting stirred up, you know, there was a lot of posers out there really excited to go fight the man. But then, you know what? The man became the first black president in U.S. history, and that was cooler to support that. So it's like, you know, I don't care about his wars or his drone strikes. We're going to go to sleep. That's all my opinion. That's not the opinion of AE or anything like that. I want to get your take on the impact of the Obama presidency on anti-war and 9/11 truth.
That was a very big part of what we faced in our chapter. And again, Kathy Bracewell, who is my lady friend, she protested Vietnam at University of Wisconsin-Madison in the late 60s while her one and only brother was doing 2 years in the jungles of Vietnam. And here Kathy was, she was protesting the war, not the troop, you know, and she wanted her brother and other young men to come back and not be in a war that was basically BS, and they knew it. And Kathy was out in the streets getting, you know, roughed up by the police, pepper sprayed, all that, and so when this one started up, Kathy in 05 started up her East Central Florida chapter of Code Pink, Women for Peace. And at that time, the organization seemed like the other organizations, they seemed to be more concerned about their mission statements of stopping the war than the politics. And she had a very strong chapter as well. We went to a conference, or we went to the big rally in Washington in 07, January 07, and Kathy approached the national leadership and she's saying, why are you questioning 9/11? That's the reason for the 9/11 wars. And she was told that they didn't want it to be detracted from what they were trying to do, is stopping the war. And it didn't make any sense, but that was the answer. But we didn't bother with that. Kathy started the weekly protest in Daytona Beach every Thursday night during the drive home, and we did more than just wave signs, Andy. We had packets with the 9/11 Truth DVDs, a compilation. We entitled it "Questioning the U.S. War on Terror," and every week we'd have about 50 packets, and when the light turned red, the right lane turned, we went out in the street and handed them all out. And Kathy's protest went on for more than 9 years. And we
Wow.
got into the Obama presidency. Let's see, that was 05. And this was on the outskirts, right on the edge of the Black community in Daytona Beach. And the Black community in Daytona Beach, pretty significant part of the population. And my best friend in Vets for Peace, our chapter was Black, Roberto Barragan. Obama gets in, and as you mentioned, the wedding party in Pakistan, a third day in office, he sends drone bombers into Pakistan. Junior Bush hadn't even gone there yet, right? And so it's a new country we're bombing. And one of our members, Tom Santoni of St. Augustine, wrote an article that was published on afterdowningstreet.org, which is now called War is a Crime or whatever, David Swanson's organization, called Impeach Obama, all in caps. And he made the case, he said, my God, Obama is doing the same thing that we've been calling for the impeachment of Bush for the past 6 years or what have you. Anyone that's okay with this has got blood on their hands, for allowing these innocents to be killed. So that turned into a resolution at our chapter level. And as I mentioned, my best friend was Roberto, a Black fellow, combat medic, special forces. And I was in a tough spot because I had to present it to the chapter as a resolution to impeach Obama. And my best friend was a Black fella. And I had to make a decision. Should I carry out my duties as a chapter leader or resign, because I didn't want to risk my friendship. And I did my job. The resolution passed at the chapter level. Roberto still was my friend. He didn't like the outcome. And that's what led bringing the resolution to the National Convention that summer. Now, mind you, Obama's only in, the first Black president, was only in for the few months yet, and I'm pushing this resolution at the National Convention, and they wanted no part of it. They wanted to run me out on the rail. But we kept persevering. And next year, 2010, next year, 2011, it got passed at National, but the leadership just squashed the call for it. The big call, the letters to congressmen, the demand for impeachment, that was squashed by national leadership, which they didn't want to offend the Black community. They were concerned about their funding and who knows what other influences were there. But that's the kind of chapter we had. We really adhered to the mission statement of the organization, but the 9/11 truth, as I mentioned, we're out there every Thursday night during the drive home right on the edge of the Black community in Daytona Beach. And we had been out there. This is January of 09. So we'd been out there since the summer of 05, 6, 7, 8, 9. We've been out there for 4 years every Thursday night. And the Black community knew us to be real. And we were for real, and we didn't get swayed. We were about the mission, and even though our signs and our literature were calling for impeaching Obama to stop the wars, we didn't get any crap. We had respect. We were known as being truthful and for real, and we didn't get a lot of support. They were, but we didn't get any hard time because they knew it was all BS. We'd been informing our community for years now, and Obama wasn't what he had promised to be, and they knew too. They knew. So that's we continued on, and our demonstration went 9 years. It went to the end of 2014. So that was into Obama's second administration, and at that time, his vice president and Obama himself and other names that we would know were over there in the Ukraine doing their thing, and overthrowing the Ukrainian government. And as I mentioned, 9/11 opened the gates for all these wars.
We don't talk about that in modern times. It's that Putin woke up one day and decided he wanted to invade the Ukraine,
Right.
He didn't like his coffee or something, or he stubbed his toe and he said, I'm going to take it out on them.
Yeah.
No, but we don't talk about 9/11, the post 9/11 world, the post 9/11 agenda, and people will say, "Oh, they didn't invade all the countries that were on that list." Well, look, plans change over time. If you've ever planned anything with any kind of depth to it, like a 9/11 anniversary event or whatever, plans change from your original vision of things because things on the ground change and all of that. So, we're basically seeing them still trying to implement this plan, which is just asserting American dominance all over the world. We're in trouble now. We were very scared of nuclear war over the last couple of weeks. And, economically, the prices of things at the stores, we just don't need this. This is not good for the average person in America. I would love to live in a country that doesn't have so much drama swirling around it. I don't know, Finland or something like that, something where people get up, go to a job, go home and enjoy the rest of their day. And they're not being bombarded with some national drama where it's like, hey, but let me buy some jars of peanut butter and let me get ahead of the dog food just in case there's nuclear missiles raining down on my head this week, And it's kind of a pointless thing to do anyway because everyone would be dead. But this is a result of us not getting on top of 9/11, where you have very clear, obvious evidence. And look, had Joe Biden said, and I think Joe Biden is the worst president in U.S. history. Granted, the bar gets lower and lower with each one, but had Joe Biden said, I'm interested in 9/11, I would have done whatever I had to do to try to get some action on that. We're bipartisan is the point I'm making. We would have worked with Obama. It's doubtful Bush would have done anything, but anybody, because those are the issues that I like the most. Nothing having to do with getting some guy elected. And I can't stand anything that revolves around any particular person or individual, even movements. They should not be about individuals. They should be about a specific cause and what's good for that cause, because those are the important things. These are the things that last and can go beyond, personalities and things like this that can always be taken down. So that's why AE 9/11 Truth is so important, and the 9/11 Truth movement.
Yes. And you mentioned something very key, Andy, that we can't elect ourselves out of this. And if the Obama, first thing he's going to do is stop the wars, and then following Obama, Donald Trump, these wars are still going. We have to be the answer. I really appreciated the young folks that started that organization, which was truly nonpartisan. We are change, out of New York City. Be the change you want to see, the Gandhi quote. We're the answer. And what we did with our chapter on the weekly demonstrations, as well as other events in the community, we didn't just wave signs, man. The media was hurting us. They were misleading us. And so what we did was we became the media ourselves. Yep. And Larry Pinckney used to, my friend Larry Pinckney, when we were doing the show, he'd really highlight Martin Luther King's statement, nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. And yep. I believe that anyone listening to this program right now, everyone can do one thing before we hit midnight, be it write a website, ae911truth.org on something out in the community, take a flyer. We use this Firefighters for 9/11 Truth flyer, drop it anywhere. We get junk mail with postage paid return envelopes from these politicians. Take the envelope, stick this in, and throw it back in the mailbox. But as far as you mentioned AE 911 Truth and how they are key, they've always stuck to the science and their specialty, which is, they're the ones who know about how buildings work and fires and such. It doesn't have to be complicated. It's very simple. Fires don't make. Well, here we put this little addendum on the flyer. The question is asked by We Are Change of Central Florida. Fires don't make steel-framed concrete skyscrapers blow up into dust and fall in perfect symmetry in nearly free-fall speed into the path of most resistance. Our nation has been silent all these years while millions have died in the name of the 9/11 lie, including over 6,800 of U.S. troops. How much longer will we remain silent? That's all that's really needed.
Yep.
We don't have to have the big explanation where people say, too much information, what are we going to do? Keep it very simple. And I believe in these trifold, Andys, and I'd like to speak with you off air about maybe getting AE 911 Truth to add to its library of literature. Where we can be the media. That'll be off air. But what else was I going to say? Daggone it. I'm drawing a blank,
Well,
Andy.
actually, I want to highlight something because we're down to about 9 minutes left here. And, I've always said, and I stole this from World War II propaganda, but it's good. Small things done well every day are what win wars. So, nobody's going to do it by themselves. Good God, 9/11. It's a big conspiracy. I'll use the word. It's not a theory. It is a conspiracy. So, it took a lot of people probably to pull it off. It's going to take a lot of people to expose it, but doing small things here and there, whatever it is, I promised them that C-SPAN that I wouldn't bombard them with calls, but I can't stop somebody from calling in tomorrow morning when someone's on there, as long as I'm not the one orchestrating it. Yeah.
That was a great effort I don't know if your audience, all of the audience.
Oh, they've heard the story. That's my old story. I'm like grandpa who can't shut up about it. But
great effort.
But the thing is like, I don't have to be involved for people to do that. It's not that hard. You just pick up the phone and, have your question ready and do it. You can get right to your congressman and stuff. I want to talk about this.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Show what you're going to show. Well, the Bobby McIlvaine Act. Yeah.
I don't know if that's where you were going, but okay. I mentioned sharing the message with others in our community beyond the choir. I really believe a big problem with the anti-war movement and the 9/11 Truth movement is we spend a lot of time talking to each other, and not as much time speaking outside the community. But okay, what can we do now? 9/11 was 23 years ago, but we still have the wars allowed by the 9/11. But what can we gather around now that could have an impact? Something that folks, instead of saying, "Oh, what can we do? It's ancient history. What can we do about it?" I think we can take something like the Bobby McIlvaine World Trade Center Investigation Act. This is something that Congress can initiate. And I think people can get around this, and it's something that we can get around now and grab onto and push. And remember, the Congress, they're called representatives. Members, there are representatives, and this is something we can do now. It's not ancient history. There is something we can do. And more people, I read the article by Craig McKee. More and more people with large audiences who wouldn't talk about 9/11 years ago are now feeling safe to talk about it. Jimmy Dore, Candace Owens, Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson. Boy, what an audience he has. They're all questioning the official story. And that's all it takes. Here in our justice system in America, you have a trial, jury of your peers, for a crime that you're accused of. But before you could be sentenced to prison or death or what have you, it has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the crime was committed. We had war that's killing millions and sending thousands of U.S. troops home in body bags. And what I just read, fires cannot blow up buildings into dust. And four jumbo jet, known to be hijacked jumbo jet airliners, do not fly around the northeast corridor of the United States for an hour and a half without being intercepted. That's all you really need to know, Andy. That's reasonable doubt. And so we've got it. We just have to bring it to our representatives. And I'd like to see how we can go about maybe approaching firehouses and architects and other veterans posts and get, like what happened with our impeachment resolution and Veterans for Peace. You can present it to a local post or a local fire union or whatever they are, or a local chapter of architects or whatever, building professionals, and ask them to vote on it at their local chapter or post level. And you, like the USS Liberty, that's how it got passed at national, was it starts at the chapter levels, and it's something that we as listeners and individuals can do in our own local communities. We don't have to get on a bus and go to Washington, D.C. So I'd like to pursue this idea with you folks.
Well, let's talk about that after we're done recording. I just want to give an honorable mention to this because it's such an iconic image in different places on our website. But you were part of the 3-beam team here, and this was in September 11, 2010. And Richard Gage had said that he was going to do this, but I had to go home early because I think I had to work the next day or whatever. So I didn't get to see this in person, but they managed to shine a 3rd beam up there along with the other 2 that are being shined with the Twin Towers. And we've only got a minute or so left. Okay. I just want to know, though, did you guys get in any trouble? Did anybody come up and say, hey, what are you doing? You're not allowed to do that.
And God bless Barbara Honegger and the members of AE 9/11 Truth who organized this event. Brett Bracewell of We Are Change Central Florida at the time, and I drove up 2 of the high-powered spotlights that Barbara had scouted out, and someone else got the other 2 in the Catskills. So we had 4 of these spotlights in a rent-a-wreck pickup truck right down there by the lower Manhattan. And every year, the powers that be would shine the high beams of the Twin Towers. And Barbara Honegger had the idea to do a 3rd beam to bring attention to Building 7 that Bob Bowman mentioned. Came down in perfect symmetry, no plane hit, and that was a gas. We really, and all the anti-war people were at that conference. They knew about the nanothermite, but it was more important for them to face off against the right-wingers over this proposed MOS. Call them racist, and the right-wingers called the anti-war people communists or whatever. And
most of political dialogue is just sticking your tongue out at the other side now. Yeah. That's why I don't even want to be a part of it. If I was ever not at AE or something happened to AE, I probably wouldn't do another podcast because it's like you're required to either take the MAGA side or the left side. And like this idea of just having neutral shows that just cover like a topic or whatever, that gets drowned out because nobody's interested in that. They just want to go to something that will reinforce their opinions that they already have.
Yeah.
So I'd probably just go to writing or something, but anyway, we are out of time right now. Phil, thank you so much for all the work that you have done over the years, for sharing your experience here with our audience, and for, of course, coming on 9/11 Freefall tonight.
Thank you very much, Andy. It's been a pleasure. Hope to do it again.
Hit that notification bell and slam the like button and subscribe. Thanks.